Hey everybody, thanks for taking the time to listen to the Real Talk podcast. We hope that these discussions will inform and inspire you to engage in your own Real Talk. Today's episode is brought to you by our official sponsor, Van, builders of custom trucks, trailers, and enclosure buildings tailored to your needs. Be sure to check them out at www.tryvan.com. A big thanks to them for making these conversations possible. Now, on to the episode. Welcome, everybody, to episode 61 of the Real Talk podcast. Today's episode is a Real Talk Roundup, number 2 of the Real Talk Roundups. So that's an exciting day, exciting podcast ahead. We're going to be covering some interesting topics. And of course, as always, going through the last 3 episodes that Tyler and myself have done. So on today's show, Tyler is joining us. So we are reunited back on the show, of course, virtually, but it's good to have you here, Ty. And then we also have Marty VanDriel from Reform Perspective as a part-time writer and assistant editor. And then, of course, we have the main man, the big cheese, John Dykstra, the editor himself over at Reform Perspective. So you all know and love John. You heard him last time. And he's got some thoughts. He's got some opinions, and it's going to be a fun show. So we're going to be covering, obviously, the climate change episode that I did, and then the Cardis episode. And then finally, we'll be talking about the creation versus evolution episode that Ty did. And then we have 2 other segments after that. Marty will be talking about why are all the good-looking Canadians moving south, apparently, to quote Marty, and what that trend means and what's going on there. So that'll be an interesting segment coming up later in the show. And then John has some updates for us on the 52 and 52 book reading challenge that he has been doing with a couple of his colleagues. So he'll be filling us in on all the great books he's been reading throughout 2022. So stay tuned for that later on in the show. So without further ado, we will start with the climate change episode. I'll throw it over to Ty if he wants to insult or / critique me for how that episode went. What were some of your thoughts there, Ty?
Well, I was looking pretty hard for some criticism there on this first one, but no, not too much. It was an interesting episode. I mean, probably a nice, easy one for you to get going by yourself hosting, because he was a well-spoken guy. So, interestingly enough, I found out that he was, kind of sympathetic to the theistic evolution view. So that's pretty interesting. Well, I guess we'll talk about that later. But one of the things that I found interesting was just the fundamental understanding of climate change. You don't usually think about it. You usually think about it in terms of the climate, in terms of like how the politicians are, like, the world's kind of framing things, but to really think about it like at the fundamental basis, it's an argument about how to create and store energy, which is, if you really think about it, it's like, how efficiently can we do this, and then what's the best way that we can use this energy? And if you really think about it like that, it really puts it in perspective how much better we have it than everyone else. So I thought that was just kind of eye-opening, in that, like, we're so worried about our little segment of the world, and there's people burning wood in clay huts around the world, and like how little of a difference, some of these things that we think we're doing actually are. So, so that was kind of nice, like a good explanation at the beginning. And there was one other thing he mentioned about subduing the earth. And the kind of the dichotomy between having like a harmonious view of like living with the earth, right? Everyone wants to, like, they almost put the earth in, or the nature in, a kind of a box that is like, becomes a god to you, right? And living in a harmonious relationship with it, as opposed to what we believe as Christians, we should be subduing the earth. So, but better understanding what subdue is, not dominating, but kind of setting everything in its place, and then using the earth responsibly. So not too much controversial about that opinion, but a couple interesting things that I thought.
Yeah, for sure. I should mention the guest was Dr. Calvin Beisner. So if anyone wants to go look him up,
I didn't want to say his name because I don't know how to say it.
Well, there you go. We'll link it below. So if people want to go and look into some of his other work, they can do that as well. But I can see John is chomping at the bit there, or champing at the bit rather. You have some thoughts, John?
Yeah, I enjoyed going on a speaking tour with Dr. Beisner a few years back for RP, and we had some fun chats. The one area where he was speaking of how we should make the world better than we got it. It was a very parable of the talents kind of thought. The Lord gives you this, and now go and make more of it. One thought I think Christians can also throw in there is, we know that the world is coming to an end. And so there are certain trade-offs we're going to have to make. And so it shouldn't be beyond our thinking to think that there are parts of the world we might use up, that essentially we might make the world worse. Oh, are we going to run out of oil? When I was growing up, that was a reason for all sorts of panic and all sorts of government initiatives and restrictions. And then we found more. So it all was for naught. But even if it hadn't been, that wouldn't have been a reason to be so panic stricken. Maybe that if you imagine that God's in control, we're not going to go out by being obedient to him. We're not going to be harmed by following and making food affordable for poor people, things like that. So it's kind of a contrast, but the two go together. Okay, we're supposed to develop the earth that God's given us and make it better and improve on it. But there could be situations where, hey, you know what, the spotted owl is not going to be around anymore because there are all these people in these huts who need some access to clean drinking water or something like that. So that was one contrast with what he was saying. I wanted to pitch just one thought, like how do we present this to people who disagree with us? So that's in Christian camp, and that's also outside. With the folks outside, I'm thinking, I always wonder why, with their million-year time scale, that they're not, it was warmer, it was colder. By what standard is today's temperature the one that it has to be? So I've never really understood that. Have you guys ever encountered somebody with an answer to that? Who cares if it's going up 2 degrees? It was way warmer a million years ago, according to their scale.
Yeah, even Dr. Beisner, he mentioned that we're, he in his timeline we were in some interglacial period or something too. So, it's an impossible question if that's your time frame.
It's a good question to ask, though, John. Yeah, I wonder though. I guess it does. Your view of the end times kind of play into that as well, and how you think the Earth is going to end up. Because, like, to maybe push back a little bit on your point, and maybe I'm misunderstanding you a bit, so I'll get some clarification there. But to, like, for the oil example, yes, we should use it responsibly. But if I understand you correctly, you're saying if we run out, c'est la vie, so be it. I would say that God has given us this earth and he's given us resources, and like, they're out there, to your point, but we should be busy trying to use them responsibly and actively finding new technologies to find new ways to extract oil. Am I making sense there? Do you know what I'm saying?
Yeah, I'll give an example that takes it just outside of global warming, but the same thoughts. With overpopulation, people were talking about how we were going to run out of resources. So that was a reason then not to have kids. So it impacted fuel, oil as well. That was another reason not to have kids. And I would say that the church's response to that would be kind of what you just said. Well, okay, I guess we got to develop something new, because the one thing we're not going to do is stop having kids. Well, but you have to, because we're going to run out. No, that's not the answer. Maybe that's even a problem, but that's not the answer. So now let's go figure out a solution that doesn't involve disobeying God. So yeah, we might use things up. We might leave the world, but we might, hey, there was just a report this week that they're starting to figure this fusion thing out, which they've been saying for a while now. But if they do that, all our energy concerns are kind of seem to be done with.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a testament to God's creative hand in all of creation, and that the resources are out there and he's given us the skills. It just takes us time to figure it out. So there's definitely some faith involved in that, though, in terms of the example of children, for sure. We should flip it over to Marty for a sec, because I know he's got a few things to say.
Well, just to respond to what John said, I did find it interesting that Dr. Beisner spoke about letting the free market do its thing with regards to energy sources. Rather he would. It sounds like the Cornwall Alliance would be strongly in favor of government funding not being used in any way for promotion of solar or promotion of other alternative energy. And then, interestingly, he used the phrase, "When will we run out of those kind of resources like petroleum, like oil?" He said first decades, and then he said generations. I thought, wow, that kind of puts it in perspective that we've got a lot of with the new technology, with fracking and so on, access to natural resources that, as John said, we thought we would run out of. Now it looks like there's a pretty long runway before we would run out, and rather than waste government money on those kind of programs, let the free market do its thing. I thought that was kind of an interesting perspective. The other stat that he shared that I found fascinating was the fact that, and I'm not sure where the stat came from, but he said that human deaths from natural catastrophes have dropped 95% in the last 100 years, largely due to better building techniques, better technology, safer places to live. What a dramatic statistic that really is part of the creation mandate, living safely in a world that could be a dangerous place, but with proper use of resources can be that much more conducive to human life.
No, 100%. Any other closing thoughts on that, guys?
Yeah, I was just wondering if I could pitch just a couple books here. And this is Gordon Wilson's Different Shade of Green. Doesn't work so well with the lighting here, but A Different Shade of Green. He is starting everything from a biblical standard, but he would be maybe more conservative than I would be. And I love him for it, because basically he sees an appreciation. He opened me up to the appreciation for that spotted owl. I was just talking about, okay, I'm going to throw the spotted owl under the bus. Well, God made it. God made a wonder. And at the same time as man is more important than the spotted owl, that spotted owl is not unimportant. So that was Gordon Wilson, A Different Shade of Green. And Bjorn Lomborg came up in the discussion, and just False Alarm, one of the more encouraging books. This guy believes all the UN reports, and he takes them and he says, it's not that scary. It's not that bad. Stop worrying. And we can do stuff. So I'm far more skeptical of those reports than he is, but he's still a nice calming influence. And just on RP itself, we just published 7 Biblical Principles of Environmental Stewardship by Levi Minderhound. I'm not saying that right, but people will figure it out. And I had one, Catastrophic Global Warming, a brief biblical case for skepticism that could be helpful.
Okay, good stuff. Thanks, John. All right, moving on to the next episode we did. This was a fun one for me as a recovering political junkie, talking to Ray Pennings over at Cardis, a think tank in Ottawa, kind of the only real major Christian think tank in this country, at least. Maybe we'll start with the American Marty. You want to give us some of your thoughts on that episode, Marty?
Yeah, I found it a fascinating episode. What a guy. Ray Pennings is a confident guy. As we spoke about earlier, you're able to feed him a question and he can give you an opinion that is thoughtful, that is reasoned, and he's not worried about being super brief. But it was a very interesting article. He's obviously got a lot of a very interesting interview, a lot of experience in politics. I found the survey of Canadian religious life particularly interesting. I think he said something like 16% of Canadians would be religiously committed. So those would be people who attend church regularly, who pray regularly, who want their kids educated in a Christian manner, and a couple of other characteristics. And 20% of Canadians atheist, and then 45% or something like that spiritually uncertain, I think is the label that they use. So quite a dramatic thing to think that only less than 20%, 16% of Canadians would be kind of in the same category as most Christians that we know, people who are totally committed to a Christian worldview and live that way.
Totally. They weren't surprising stats, if I'm honest, but it was still, to see that was very stark for sure. Ty, some of your thoughts on the Cardis one?
Yeah, even to Marty's point, like I it's hard to say because Ray might listen to this, but going in, I was probably more skeptical about think tanks as a method of getting things done than, as a conservative business kind of minded guy. Like, you want to see results every time you do something. But to the surveys and stuff that Marty was talking about there, like to see or to have him explain how they put all those surveys together and the really thoughtful, the categories that they put all that stuff, it makes you like appreciate all of what they do. Like, because they really come up with, it's not like the world or secular view of religious versus not religious. It was like it was a Christian view. Like they had like 7 or 8 points on that survey that was like, well, you might go to church, but do you pray? Do you do this? Do you do that? So that was actually it was just encouraging to see a smart guy like that doing smart work. So, but one other point that it kind of intrigued me. It was kind of speculative on his part, but he mentioned in the discussion about MAID, medical assistance in dying, you guys chatted about some research that they did where they took a survey. They looked at grade results from religious or different groups. So like Jewish kids did better in their maths, in their hard like science kind of subjects when they were also taught in a Jewish school and likewise Christians and stuff. And he kind of speculated that it might be the same for health outcomes. And I'm curious to see if that would align in our community, like in a Reformed community where you have, the home and the church and school, in kids' lives where those things are aligned. Do they have better education experiences, health experiences, or I imagine their lifestyle might move that needle a bit. But from the MAID side of things, he mentioned like religious hospitals, which like there's some in Hamilton, like mostly Catholic, I guess, like historically. But if we can get these like health-based or Christian-based health organizations set up, that would, to me, is a decent like avenue to attack the MAID, controversial MAID things that are going on in politics. So I thought that was pretty interesting. I don't know if he's going to dig into that more, but
it's a good way to frame the issue too, because like with MAID being at the forefront and also all the healthcare issues we've been having more recently in this country, you can make like, that's the example of the kind of research that gets done at Cardis that would not get done anywhere else, making the point that, hey, even if you're secular and you might not like religious institutions, look, if a Jewish kid goes to a Jewish school, he gets better outcomes. It's likely the same thing for health. If they do that study, you can make a very like non-religious secular case for having those separated hospitals and health centers. Mm-hmm. So, but John, let's flip to you for some of your thoughts.
Yeah, that's both the reason I love what they do, and also sometimes a little bit worried how it'll be used. He kind of made me think of Jordan Peterson, in that what we love about Jordan Peterson is he says something that's flat out biblical, but then he says it with like the latest sociological study or just he's got all this stuff at his fingertips and he can just go. And that's Ray Pennies. So you want to find out about education. Well, he can cite all this stuff. He's done the research. He's done the work. But essentially what he's doing is he's believing that what God said is good, that God's ways work. And now I'm going to go get the stats to back it up. I guess the only thing I'm a little bit worried about is like, let's not lose that connection between the two. Let's not pitch the stats. Let's be fully, hey, God's way works. And here are the stats. We don't want to lose that connection, because otherwise then what we have is Jordan Peterson. We have half full instead of the whole meal deal.
Mm-hmm. For sure. No, that's a good point. But yeah, that's I think it is just the practical way to get things done, at least in our country, in the context we talked about with a lack of religion in Canada. But yeah, as long as that link isn't severed, we should be okay.
How do you stop the lack of religion? Somebody has to bring it up.
Well, but it's also, if you have the stats, it's kind of an onboarding or an avenue for a more secular, skeptical person to see, oh, hey, there's actually some truth here. There's some merit here. I mean, that's what the Peterson effect has been for many thousands, maybe millions. It's led people back to religion, back to Christianity specifically. So it's not without its merit, at least that approach.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's an interesting critique, but I still have a hard time like discounting all the research. Like he's citing things where, Cardis research is getting cited inside of, like, I think it was something in the Alberta legislature that was there. So it's like the secular politicians, they have an agenda that they're pushing, and then they go and look for research, and what the research they need is Christian research. So it's hard to say, like, well, we never got the tip of the hat, like to Christianity, or you never really got the recognition it needed, but it's also good stuff. So it's like, yeah.
Well, on that point, if the fireman comes in, rescues the person from the burning building, and doesn't ask them whether they know Jesus, but they've saved somebody, they're doing their work, right? So if somebody takes those stats and doesn't even know where they came from, that's all fine and good. It brought us in the right direction. But at the same time, we got to be overt about that, because these people need to know why this is right. Why are those guys? Why is Jordan Peterson always getting things right? Well, he's getting them right because he's ripping off God, and we need to be the guys who are explaining that, right?
Mm-hmm. That seems like Cardis should do that as a face of the organization, and their research should stand on its own. And
well, they are known as a faith-based group, so that connection is made to anybody who's familiar with them.
It's also
past then.
Yeah, it's also a question of like role though. Like, should a think tank be that role that which you're saying, John, is like to let people know, like, hey, there's actually a background to this, and these are biblical truths that we are just finding out by looking at the stats of how they manifest in life. Or is that more of a role for a magazine like RP, or for the church in general? Yeah.
What is the chief end of man?
To glorify God. Sure. But there's so many avenues to glorify God. And one of those is researching his world.
Right. So get those stats and let them know that that you are God's child, and that's why you're so smart.
Fair enough. Maybe I'm just a pragmatist. Marty, any thoughts before we move on?
I love that you asked about the current political climate and prospects for leaders. I'm just going to tease that a little bit, because I thought that was great. A neat discussion of his opinion on each current leader. I thought that was fascinating, especially as an American, just not too familiar with all the politicians being mentioned there. I also liked he had some thoughts on COVID, and he made one point that I thought was worth repeating. That was about what's government's role when it comes to a worship service. So if we gather together and we do so, let's say abiding by current standards, whatever those were, then when we're seated for worship, then what happens during that worship service, how we sing, whether we sing with masks on, if we have Lord's Supper, or if we have a child baptized, none of that is the state's business or the province's business. I thought that was a helpful way to look at it, even though I didn't agree with all his thoughts about COVID. That one in particular, I thought, there was some wisdom there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I appreciate his perspective, and also he's very active in his own local church too, and was a part of making some of those decisions. So it carries some weight for sure what he said. Any other thoughts, guys, before we move on? Good to go. All right. So we'll move on to the third episode that we are touching on for the feedback and whatnot, and for our thoughts. And that was the episode that Tyler did with Matt Morrison. We're talking about 6-day creation versus evolution. I'll just give a brief primer of my thoughts. Maybe I enjoyed it. I thought it was a good introduction episode. I think there's certainly a lot of different rabbit holes you could go down in that regard. But I thought Matt it gave a reasonable overview of the case between the two. And there's lots more areas to explore on this topic. So I'd be interested to know what you guys thought. Maybe we'll go to John first on this one.
Yeah, I almost just want to pitch sort of ways to expand off of it. He referenced John Stanford at one point, not by name, but by the genetic studies that he's doing about how we're not long for this earth. Your kids are born with 100 more genetic errors than you had. And actually that just keeps going. So we are rusting out is an important point. The very opposite of evolution. So on RP's website, we have John Sanford's piece on that. And this brought me back again to, you were talking about how to pitch this to even Christians and non-Christians. How do you bring this up? And I am wondering if God's kind of making it easier for us nowadays to point out that there's ideology behind science, because all you have to do is bring up, boys are boys, girls are girls, and that there are some very smart people with lots of letters behind their name that don't even get that right, and what's blinding them. So just the idea that you can be blinded by your ideology is God's making it more. We can introduce that a lot easier. So there's a couple articles on RP's website in particular that I thought might be of interest. And one was Margaret Helder's Wrong Questions Lead to Wrong Answers. Because again, you guys were touching on materialism. If you rule out God from the start, I'm not going to see anything as having evidence by the supernatural. I had a friend, a PhD scientist. He said, you don't do science if you include the option that something might have been miraculous. Well, okay, so you're going to rule out the supernatural from the start, and now you're going to say, how did life begin? Well, no wonder you're going to get weird answers. Margaret Helder's article has an illustration of square watermelons. How did those come to be? Well, let's rule out any intelligent design and come up with an answer. You can come out with some really creative ones, but they'd be wrong because they're put in a box and they're grown that way, see-through box and grown that way. If you rule out intelligent design from the start, you get wrong answers. So hers is a wonderful article on that point. And then there's so many videos on the site. If you go to reformperspective.ca/100, you get to all sorts of documentaries, including many free ones about creation and evolution. So it's really worth checking out.
Perfect. Thanks, John. Marty.
Yeah. I thought I was really impressed by Matt. Here's a layman. I think he said he preaches part-time, but clearly he's not a scientist. And then I think he said he spent 1,000 hours studying this topic. That's inspiring to me, that the fact that somebody who is not a scientist can read great literature, can look at all kinds of statistics and the latest science to work with, to have good arguments ready at your fingertip to talk to those who believe in evolution. So I found it very inspiring. I thought, wow, that's something anybody can do. So it was a bit of a challenge to me. A long time ago, I started getting, in addition to Reform Perspective, Creation Magazine. It's by the folks at Answers in Genesis. There are such great resources available for Christians who you want to know about, what's a logical case we can make for the fact that dinosaurs probably lived, probably were on the ark, and probably died out after that time period. Wonderful material that's all available. So I was personally inspired by Matt's research to say, hey, I should dig into this more as well and have more of those statistics and arguments ready at my fingertips and in my brain rather than having to look them up. So hats off to Matt.
Yeah, for sure. There's so much out there that we can get into. And yeah, if we follow some of the links that John just mentioned as well, lots of ways to educate yourself. Ty, what was your biggest takeaway from doing that interview?
Yeah, since that episode, I've had a couple discussions with a few different people about different avenues to take this conversation to after. I'm really interested in evolution I think we don't talk about it as much as we should. I think we used to, or I used to anyways, as a young person, because it's an easy one for a themed young people's night or something like that. That's the first thing that everyone says. But I think a discussion could be had around as Christians, is there any debate that can be had within a Christian community, or are we set on like, the most stark contrast would be theistic evolution versus 6-day creation. So like, is there any wiggle room in there, or is there like any conversation that we could have, or are we kind of, locked in? And the other thing would be the approach. I think we touched on that a little bit, but the approach, like how do we approach it from, let's be as objective as we can about the science and then see what that says about the Bible? Do we take the Bible as fact, learn as much as we can about our world and the created order, and then we layer science over that? Because even in today's, like John alluded to that, like what science can you trust anymore? Science went into quotations in the last 3 years. So it's like in an evolution, somehow in my mind, that's always kind of been the case. Like when you hear some discovery from, 500,000 years ago, it's like, well, is the discovery wrong, or did they come at it wrong? Or was it like, is this just a fraud investigation from the beginning? Like, and there's no way to know without, doing that primary research yourself. So it's, I think there's a lot more conversations that can be had, and definitely more experts, like scientific experts, that we could engage with probably on this.
Yeah, the presuppositions for the scientists who come to do the research, and also, like John mentioned, the questions that they ask. If you start with the wrong questions or the incorrect presuppositions, then it can definitely take you down some interesting and some incorrect roads. But yeah, I would be super interested to do an episode in the future comparing theistic evolution versus 6-day creationism, because I just don't know enough. And it would be interesting to find out. I don't know if you have any suggestions or more resources specifically on that topic, John.
Yeah, we have materials on old creation. The cost of an old creation, I think, is what it's called. You start. Was there sin and death before the fall? Is the operative question, and I will say I think it kind of rules it out. I'll also encourage. This was kind of the issue that hit me the most when I went to university, because all the smartest people in the room held to it. And here I come in. I'm not this cocky guy who thinks they're all a bunch of dweebs. I can tell they're much smarter than I am, and yet I'm saying they're wrong. So who am I? But I guess I would encourage people to do that 1,000 hours, or do the 10 hours, whatever. Just keep digging, because you can trust God. You can trust that He's not throwing curveballs. Dig deeper, you'll find out more truths. I think even in something as simple as the cell, it's a wonder. It's a joy to dig into this stuff, and you start finding out the levels of complexity. I am convinced that we will never run out of discoveries as we dig further down, because we're finding out, okay, you can read DNA this way. Oh, it gives you a different instruction when you read this way, and it gives you a different instruction when you take this bit, and a different one when you do that. And it has highways, and it has machines, and it's astonishing. I will pitch one book just on that front. Matt mentioned The Mount Improbable. And so there's a book, The Stairway to Life. And what these guys do, so the analogy that Dawkins used was, when you go and see, how do we get life? And it looks like an impossible mountain to scale. Well, then you go behind the mountain, and then there's just a whole bunch of steps, and it's really easy to do. Okay, well, what these guys are saying is, we'll break down the steps. We'll go on that stairway, and it turns out every step is a Mount Improbable, and we'll grant. And then they take each step one by one, and they say, okay, well, it turns out by secular standards, it's impossible. Now we'll just grant that it happened, and we'll go to the next step. Oh, that one's impossible too. And we'll just pretend that happened too. Now we'll go to the next. So these guys make a astonishing presentation. It's so much hokum. So dig deep, keep digging, and you'll find out how astonishing we are wonderfully made. Yeah,
for sure. That's an encouraging note to end on, I think. Speaking of digging deep, I know Marty's been digging deep into the research of Canadians moving south side to the States. So do you want to give us the lowdown on what's going on, and what trends you're seeing there, Marty?
Yeah, you bet. This was a really fun article, I interviewed 3 different family members of families, extended families that have moved from Canada to the U.S. So I talked to Brian and Leanne Grimm, or Dr. Brian. So they're from BC and moved to South Dakota. And a lot of their decision process was made during COVID. And they looked south and saw the increased freedom that people had in South Dakota and Florida and other places. And they said, we're getting out of here. And so Brian took a job in South Dakota, small town. I think it's Sioux Center. Fascinating. And they are as happy as can be. They bought a house. He's got a great job and no regrets at all. Talked to Nate and Victoria Van Andel. They're a couple from Ontario who moved to Tennessee. Also, I think COVID was probably a big part of their decision-making process, but also just they've always loved the U.S. and the economic opportunities that were down there. And the third couple I spoke with was Gary and Cindy Wiska, also from Ontario, landscape supply company, I think, in Southern Ontario, and found a similar business that they bought in Fort Myers, Florida. And in the past year, 18 months, 4 of their children have all moved south as well. So different parts of the East Coast mostly. So the article is not trying to say, hey, everybody needs to get out of Canada, that boy, everything's better down here. Tries to look at, well, what are the reasons that people are doing this? And is it really better to make a trek like that? So I tried to look at the, is it really more free in the States? What are the political trends that we're seeing? Are you jumping out of the frying pan but into the fire? Some of the midterm elections gave us conservatives down here pause with some of the directions. Also looked at things like church community and finding a good church. So you're moving to a new place and kind of we have such wonderful church communities, Reformed church communities in Canada. Sometimes moving to a much smaller church federation or a much smaller congregation, it's just good to be aware of the things that you might be giving up. And that might include the kind of school societies that we're used to, mature, fairly large school societies with people of similar minds. Sometimes that's not quickly available in the U.S. So just a bunch of just kind of a chance for folks to take a second thought about it. Is it really better to be south of the border, or is it better to bloom where you're planted and make the best of what's going on around you? Be salt and light where you are. John and I both have made the decision to be on this side of the border, so we're both a little biased. So I tried not to let that come through in the article too much, but I do think that for entrepreneurs, especially, there are wonderful opportunities here south of the line. So I'll throw it back to you.
Oh, don't tempt me. Interesting. Okay. So you didn't really take an opinion in the article, though. You just kind of laid out the pros and the cons. You want to go into some of either one of those, the pros or the cons?
Sure. One big factor is just can you do it? Everyone I spoke to indicated that you need a good immigration attorney. So my oldest son is married to a Canadian. They're living in BC. And he is working on moving south with his dear wife. It's tough to do it on your own. So every single one of the people I mentioned or that I interviewed said, get yourself a good immigration attorney who knows the ins and outs. And it might cost you a fair bit of money, but they'll be able to navigate a lot of the headwaters. So that's maybe one thing. I found the discussion of what kind of church to join a very interesting topic. The availability of YouTube and live streaming has made that process a lot further. Until you arrive at a church, you don't really know what the community's like, and you won't get that through YouTube or live stream. But you'll at least get a flavor of what is that church community like? Is the preaching faithful and biblical? So we do have a lot more resources than we might have 30 years ago to find out what kind of a place we're going to.
Mm-hmm. Have you guys noticed a trend from just into Washington State, where you guys are from BC?
I think most Canadians who are looking to move south don't think about Washington first, because John and I live in a very conservative pocket of Washington, but overall it's a pretty left-leaning state. So if you're going to move, South Dakota, Florida, Tennessee, those places make a lot of sense. Economically, Washington is fantastic. It's a relatively friendly business community, and taxes are very low. So there are some real good things. We think Lyndon's fantastic, but it's not the first stop for most of our BC friends.
Makes sense. Any questions for Marty from you guys?
Yeah. What I'm just curious. Maybe I'll throw it to all you guys. What do you think about? I've heard. I think it was Aaron Rock on one of his podcasts. We had him on our podcast too. And he was talking about creating, kind of small communities, which we're, as Reformed people, especially in Canada, we're good at. Like we have small, we have church communities, but we also have school community. A lot of us work for each other, and this kind of thing. Like we're kind of, not recession proofing ourselves, but like we're kind of putting up a barrier to the world. But do you find like with these discussions that when people are moving to the States or whatever, is it wise to move to one of those conservative like places like Tennessee or Florida where they're, seem to be holding out with their conservative values and to kind of create a stronghold there? Or do you think it would be, or is it kind of a moot point? Like, do you just move somewhere and shine a light and, that's about all we can do. I mean, that's all we can do anyway, but.
Go ahead, John.
Yeah. Well, I think there is an idea you can, I heard the expression called vote with your feet. If you move to a place where your vote might actually count, like basically, I don't think I've ever been anywhere where it was close to my vote tipping anything. But what if you move to a place that's, mostly conservative and could use a few more people to bring some light and heat or light and truth? That might be one more reason to move there. And if it's hardcore, I think there'd be a different answer if you're a single guy willing to go somewhere and contend versus somebody with a family, because man, do I feel blessed to live in Lyndon with my family. But when I was a younger guy, to live in Edmonton, to be able to do all sorts of political campaigns there, that was where the action was. So different times in your life.
Yeah, that's a good way to look at it.
Go ahead, Marty, if you had something to say there.
I mean, you're asking the wrong guys, right? Because John and I both made that call to, but I think it's Mark Penninga wrote an editorial for the Next Reform Perspective about this issue, and he said something very thoughtful. He said, if you desire to do something and wise people around you encourage you to do it, then you're going to hear from others that it's not the right thing to do. But listen to wise counselors, and the Lord will be with you if you do things in a prayerful, thoughtful manner. So there's not really a wrong decision, but do so not just entirely on your own. Talk to other people about it, especially people that you respect.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure. All right, we could probably put a lid on that for now. So thanks for that, Marty. Appreciate it. That's some interesting discussion on a cool topic, and people should definitely check out the article in one of the upcoming editions of RP. Okay, we'll move over to John now. And John's going to tell us about the 52 and 52 book reading contest that he's been doing. Sounds like a lot of fun. What have you guys been up to, and who have you been doing it with?
Yeah, it has been a lot of fun. At the beginning of the year, Andre Schuten, a lawyer working for ARPA Canada, issued a challenge, and pastor missionary Jim Whitting picked it up. So did I. So we had a lawyer, an editor, and a missionary, each trying to read 52 books over the course of 2022. As it stands now, Jim has won. He's finished 52. I'm at 49. I will make it. Andre is at 42, which is, I think, a new record for him. So that's awesome. He also wrote a book during this year, so I think that should probably count for 10. So
Yeah.
He also has a few weeks to go, and I know that he will often write. He'll often read a few and then write a batch. So I think he still stands a shot. But what's been real fun about it is to read their reviews. I've enjoyed the books I've been reading, but you can only read so many. We're talking about the 1,000 hours. Okay, how many of those 1,000 hours are spent, scrolling through the phone? How many of them can be spent on really good books? Well, don't waste your time on the lousy books. Don't waste your time on just, I picked this up because it's lying around somewhere. No, there are some really important books to be accessed, to be understood. Somebody said once that you're, it might have been Peterson, that you're a combination of like the 5 people you hang out with the most. And I think there's something to that. And I think it's also transferable to like the last 10 books you've read. They'll have the last 10 meaty books you've read, maybe. They'll have an impact on your thinking. So you want to have that encouragement from these friends paper from these authors, but you also want to be sure of who you're picking and with this list, I think Jim and myself as well, but Andre, we show not just what to read, but also a little bit just how to read. What did we get out of these? What did we have to throw out? Because a lot of these were Christian, but a lot of these were not. Jim Witteveen would probably focus mostly on secular sources. He also wrote a book this year. So the guy, he read 52. He wrote a book. It's a great book. It's coming out next year. I think it's called How in the World Did We Get Here? And so he's got stuff on big tech, big government, big pharmacy. And, what unites them all is they all think, all these forces think they know how to do things best, and they all want power to do it. So they have a lot of divergent goals, but all of them involve bringing power to themselves. So he's had a lot of those kind of books. Andre and me had a few more kids' books in our mix, just a few, because we also would mock each other if we threw in too many kid books. So I threw in a couple of comics, which I got heat for, but they're like 300-page comics. So, basically, if you're thinking of doing a fun challenge with some friends, I think you should check this out. It's reformperspective.ca/52, and we'll have some suggestions for you to consider taking it up for this year.
Okay, interesting. So I have 2 takeaways from that. One is that it seems like ministers have the most time on their hands. So that's interesting. They could do 52 and read a book, but no, that's incredible. And then that also sounds like a good interview opportunity for Real Talk in the new year. So looking forward to that discussion, because he's got his finger on the pulse for sure. Any thoughts from Ty or Marty on anything John said there? I
would love to do 2 in 52. So I think good on you for getting past 4,
audiobooks are a wonderful thing. So maybe that's,
I do a few of those, but yeah.
I have well, not to your scale, John, but I have a similar competition going with my wife, trying to read 24 in a year, 2 books a month. So we both achieved it this year, which was kind of cool. So she'll be happy I mentioned that on the podcast. So I just had to squeeze that in there. But anyways, okay, this has been a fantastic show. I think we try to keep it short, but once again, it is difficult to do with so many fantastic participants and things to say. But yeah, this has been the Real Talk Roundup. It's been a fun year for Real Talk 2022. We've been able to do a lot more interview episodes than we have in past years, and the viewership is growing. You guys are engaged, you guys care, and we're covering issues that are important and having real and meaningful conversations. So we just want to thank you all for listening throughout this past year and for longer for many of you as well. We're excited to see what lies ahead for us in 2023, and we'll continue to bring you important conversations on meaningful and interesting topics. So yeah, from the whole team, we'll sign off for now, and we'll catch you on the next episode. Bye for now. Thanks for tuning in to this episode of Real Talk. We really appreciate you taking the time to listen or watch the show. If you want to send us your feedback, and we'd love to hear it, please email us at reformedrealtalk@gmail.com. If you want to find us online or social media, we got a lot of great content there. Just search Reformed Real Talk and we should come right up. This show is created and produced by myself, Lucas Holtfluer, and Tyler Vanderwood, and our wonderful podcast manager who does all the editing is Mariah Tamiga. So we're really thankful for her contribution to the show as well. That's all for now, folks. Thanks for watching or listening, and we'll catch you next time. Bye-bye.